Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this virtual forum on social justice and racial equity. My name is Alex Stokes, and I'm a reporter with Fox 8 News. It is my pleasure to be moderating this discussion hosted by the Black Professionals Association Charitable Foundation. Your work in the greater community to open doors and invest in those who are seeking a path to their professional goals is integral to solidifying a strong and diverse society. BPACF has made it their mission to uplift students, young professionals, and civic leaders in the African American community through both financial and instrumental support on their journey to excellence. Thank you all at BPACF for bringing this topic to the forefront of your virtual forum series. BPACF will be celebrating the 40th anniversary of their annual scholarship and awards gala virtually next month on Saturday, November 14th. You can still register, find more information, and make a contribution all at bpacf.org and bpacf.org/donate. I'd also like to thank Avery Dennison, a global leader in materials science and manufacturing, for sponsoring this evening's discussion and their commitment to diversity. Let's take a moment to hear from our sponsors.
Values are the guiding principles by which we live our lives.
They are what bring us together and what unite us in a shared ambition.
At Avery Dennison, our business has evolved to meet the shifting dynamic needs of our customers and the marketplace.
As our company adapts, so must our values to better inform our actions every day.
Because our values will be what define us and our culture over the long term.
We are driven by doing the right thing no matter what.
We are honest and transparent and always put ethics first.
We are big, ambitious thinkers who remain brave in the face of adversity and the unknown.
We take risks, stand up for what is right, and recognize the opportunity in failure.
We set out to gain insight and be better.
We stretch our perspective and are motivated by our customers' success.
Diversity makes us stronger.
By encouraging inclusion, different viewpoints, and debate, we generate the best ideas.
We are committed to sustainability and being a force for good.
By making a positive impact on our business, planet, and communities.
We use our imagination and intellect to create new possibilities and challenge the status quo.
We are better when we work together and leverage our collective strength to win.
We expect the best from ourselves and each other.
We continually improve and deliver on our commitments.
One global team.
8 unifying values.
Making a meaningful difference.
We are Avery Dennison.
Well, another thank you to Avery Dennison. Now, turning back to tonight and this forum on social justice and racial equity, I am joined by 3 distinguished panelists to talk about how these concepts exist in our world and how we address them. To briefly introduce our panelists, we have Ms. Normella Walker, Judge William Dawson, and Dr. Ronnie Dunn with us this evening. Thank you all for being here. If each of you would take a little time to tell us more about your backgrounds and why you're on this panel tonight. Ms. Walker, we'll start with you.
Thank you so much. So my name is Normella Walker, and I'm the Executive Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for Brigham Health, which is a hospital in Boston. So I actually live in Shaker Heights, but also in Boston. And I just want you to know how much I appreciate the invitation to be here tonight, the opportunity to fellowship in this way. This is my life's work, and I'm excited to share whatever I can with you and learn more from the panelists. I haven't been in a space like this in quite some time. Harvard is actually in the crux of whiteness, frankly. And so it's nice to be in a space like this. And so just want to appreciate really the invitation, the opportunity to be with you this evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Walker. We're so glad to have you with us. Judge Dawson, if you would give us a brief introduction.
Okay, good evening. I am Judge William Dawson of the East Cleveland Municipal Court, and I've been on the bench for 9 years, but I've been a practicing defense attorney for many, many years beyond that. I'm also a certified yoga teacher, believe it or not, and I bring those two together in my courtroom by helping the defendants have alternative lifestyles as far as their choices, as far as their decision making. So I'm trying to be a cycle breaker. That's the goal of the court.
All right, thank you so much, Judge Dawson. Good to have you with us also. Last but certainly not least, Dr. Ronnie Dunn, could you give us a brief introduction?
Yes, thank you. Good evening. I'm Dr. Ronnie Dunn. I'm the Chief Diversity Officer at Cleveland State University. I'm also an Associate Professor of Urban Studies at CSU, where I've been on faculty for 15 years. And my area of research focuses on issues of race, crime, criminal justice, as well as racial, ethnic, health, and educational disparities. And it is my pleasure to serve on this august panel with my co-panelists.
And we are so very happy to have you with us here too. And as Ms. Walker alluded to, you all have made diversity, equity, and inclusion your life's work. And that is certainly something we want to dig into and look at in more detail, especially in this time in our history. So I want to thank you all again for being here, and first begin this discussion by defining our topics tonight. Social justice focuses on the fair treatment of all people, and racial equity occurs when racial disparities in health, education, wealth, and other areas do not exist. So to our panelists, can you speak to the significance of social justice and racial equity in this urgent moment of history, and how we should address it going forward, what these concepts mean to you and what they should mean to us? Ms. Walker?
So for me, when I think about social justice, it's really all about all people being afforded basic human rights and dignity. And racial equity is not just the absence of discrimination. So a lot of discrimination occurs actually through selective helping. It's the nepotism, it's the cronyism, it's the in-group preference that people engage in. It's also the presence of systems that ensure, what we want is like full participation for people, full social participation, equitable economic access, and fairness for all people. In society, we have a society that actively discriminates through selective helping. So you, as a Black person, were excluded from Social Security because at the time that Social Security was enacted, it was really about people who were employed, and they purposefully excluded people who were domestic workers and farm workers. You were excluded from homeowner loans, you were excluded from education, and it took almost 100 years to get schools desegregated, and they're actually more segregated today than they were back in the 60s. And your government actually stopped Black Americans from advancing.
Thank you, Ms. Walker. Judge Dawson, what does social justice and racial equity mean to you, and what is the significance of these concepts at this point in time?
Very important, especially from my standpoint being a judge. And I'm a judge in a primarily African-American community. I would say about maybe 98%. And, I feel as far as social justice, it's important for me to show a side of justice that can be fair, because we know for so long it has not been fair, whether it's in the charging stage, the prosecuting stage, or even the sentencing stage, and then even how you're treated in court. So one of my missions as a judge, I think I'm here in this position at this time for a reason. And I believe one of it is to show there's a different side of justice and how to be compassionate and firm at the same time. And then when we speak about equity, I'm thinking from the standpoint of just making sure that our men and women are prepared for success. We've been, eliminated and discriminated against so long and so hard that when I see people in my courtroom, they're not even ready with the basic steps to move to the next level. And I think that's something that we have to change. So in addition to making sure that justice is being employed properly, we have to make sure that our young men and women, and all men and women, are being given the same opportunities to succeed in this country.
Thank you, Judge Dawson. Dr. Dunn, the same question to you. What do these concepts mean, and talk to their significance?
Yes, as a social scientist and a researcher, the concepts of social justice and racial equity to me mean eradicating structural and institutional racism. And those are concepts that during the 60s, there was a great focus on institutional racism, but it had waned in the intervening years until now. In this current moment, we hear greater discussion of it and having this racial reckoning where now institutions are willing to critically look at how they administer their access to resources that they have within their respective institutions. So for me, it's about examining the structures in our society, identifying those areas where there are those obstacles and barriers that, as my co-panelists have stated, were created by government policies that perpetuated the racial inequities and disparities that we see today. And then developing policies and procedures to help eradicate that, to provide people with not just equal access, but equitable access. That means giving them what they need to have greater life chances and to thrive.
Thank you, Dr. Dunn. Each of you have alluded to and opened us up to segue to a very important part of having this discussion. You can't know where you're going without knowing where you came from. History is a big part of understanding and overcoming some of these issues. I do want to talk about the fact that it's often said, you know, that institutional racism is the cause of social injustice and racial inequality. How did we get to a place where racism is institutionally embedded within our society? Judge Dawson, I'd like to start with you.
You know, I think if you look at it from a basic standpoint, it starts with power, access, money, wealth, and considering that we were not privy to that on the same level that others were, that really is kind of how you started. I mean, they are oftentimes if you're not in power, you don't create the laws. You don't have a voice in how the laws are created. You don't have a voice in how the sentencing laws are drafted and who it affects. You know what the intention is, whether it's good or bad. But if you don't have a voice, then you can't make change. So I think it starts just basically because those who are in power and who have been in power have embraced it, held on to it, and made sure that it wasn't open to others like African Americans. And now that we are hopefully getting to the point where we're at the table and we're drafting laws and we're in the rooms where these conversations are taking place, now it's up to us to make sure that we're looking out for those who are not present. So for those of us who are educated, those of us who are in the rooms, we have to make sure that we're creating laws so that when I'm on the bench, I have the leeway to make sure that social justice is actually being administered based on what we're creating and what we desire as a group of people.
And would you say it's also an element of opening up those rooms even wider to opportunities for others?
Absolutely. And making sure we have the tools and access to be prepared so that when we're given the opportunity, we're ready.
Dr. Dunn, same question to you. How did we get to a place where racism is institutionally embedded within our society?
Well, racism was embedded in our society at the founding of our nation. This year marks the 401st year since Africans were brought to these shores in 1619. And the doctrine of white supremacy is the root upon the foundation upon which this country and our Constitution was based. And embedded in the Constitution is this principle of African Americans being 3/5 of a human. So in essence, subhuman. So it is embedded within our founding documents of this nation, and the purpose and objective of our nation has been to strive towards meeting those lofty principles espoused in our preamble to the Constitution, that all men are created equal and have inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We've never achieved that, but we're striving towards that. And we've ebbed and flowed throughout history. And many would argue, and I would as well, that we're now in a period of retrenchment. I compare this current moment comparable to that just after Reconstruction which lasted a brief 12 years, and then we had another almost 100 years of Jim Crow. Once again, it's embedded in the foundation of this nation, as well as the institutions and the structures within our society.
Ms. Walker, I'd also really like to hear your thoughts on the historical aspect behind institutional racism, and just because these roots are so deep, how we begin to shovel them out.
So I just want to really appreciate what my two co-panelists just shared, because I wholeheartedly believe that. And I would add that, our founders believed boldly in white supremacy, right? It was a bedrock of the country at its founding. And they needed to perpetuate that. So racism is really about the narcissistic proclivities of the powerful and their need to exploit other people's labor. Think about who really benefits from racism. None of the crops that slavery produced were necessary to sustain human life. Sugar, tobacco, coffee, cotton, those things revolve around a consumer culture derived to bring pleasure, but not necessarily sustenance. So if we're going to understand the tragedy of this racist society that we have today in slavery, we really need to understand the economics of it, right? So what I think, rich, wealthy, white people definitely propagated this, but it's a tool really used for to divide and conquer people. And so, they profit in ways where they, gain real capital, and then working class and poor white people profit through the social capital that they gain, because they don't really make, if you look at, yes, they have a little bit higher standard of living, but if you look at them, who really pulls the levers of society, there's a vast difference between folks who have to work for a living and folks who don't. And so, I think it's really important just to think about where all this stems from. And if you could go all the way back to the modern European feudal system, where you had the lords and the serfs who kind of worked the land and did all the labor and the toiling around the lord. And even further back, if you really want to understand this, you need to actually learn more about Plato and Greece to fully appreciate the origins of this sort of narcissistic nature and need to other groups.
You talked about the economy. You all have touched upon the economy. I want to go into the power of Black buying power. In 2019, Black buying power was $1.4 trillion, greater than Mexico's GDP. And yet Black people often report discrimination while shopping and in environments like that. How do companies, and as we, have seen Avery Dennison's video on what values are, how do companies address institutional racism? Because this is such an economic problem. And how do we help generate wealth within Black communities? Ms. Walker, if you could follow up on that.
Yeah, I think we have to understand that, power is a group function. And so it doesn't serve Black people well to embrace that whole individualism, the individualistic, I get mine, you get yours kind of mentality. It really does require us to be more strategic in how we use our dollars, how we apply pressure, how we boycott. I mean, we really have to be operating as a group in order to move systems. And I think in some ways, with desegregation and integration, we have moved away from thinking like that and thinking more individually. And I think as a group, we have to learn how to utilize the tools that we have more effectively.
Judge Dawson, you have a program to help people learn to invest, to break this cycle. Can you talk a little bit to the economics of what companies need to do to address institutional racism and how to build wealth?
I totally agree that we need to be strategic with how we use our money and to mobilize around these injustices. So when we see a company that's not acknowledging our worth, not giving us the respect, not spending or reinvesting in our community, we have to act collectively. And I think it's kind of what we started with, just being disenfranchised, that when it's time to come together and sustain that over a long period of time, it gets hard. But if we do that, if we band together, make sure that we're going to let these companies know that we have a very big impact on your bottom line. So we're not going to spend with you. And then we also have to take pride in spending with ourselves, because we have a lot of very valuable companies and entrepreneurs within our community. But, you know, based on the history of our race and the things we've been through, we're always oftentimes reluctant to spend with our own and to share the wealth with our own. But we have to do it with a change of mentality. So the 2 steps is, 1, demand equality, demand that you listen to us and provide for us, because we're going to stop spending. And at the same time, we have to start investing with each other and spending with each other.
Dr. Dunn, any additional thoughts on this topic?
Yes, well, my co-panelists have covered this topic so very well. One point I will make, adding to the point that Judge Dawson raised about the mindset of within our community of spending with other Blacks and Black-owned businesses. And I'm sure we've all heard of the concept of implicit bias. Well, African Americans aren't immune to that. And we raise the concept of discuss white supremacy. Well, the other side of that, or the corollary of that, is Black inferiority. And often we look at Black merchants or in that lens, that the product is somehow, or services are somehow inferior. So we have to do some internal cleansing and disabuse ourselves of such notions that Black means inferior. We ourselves are subjected to that, and there are social psychological tests that will show evidence of that. So that's just one point I'd like to add.
Thank you, Dr. Dunn. Speaking of psychology, part of the issue with minority communities is interaction with police, racial profiling, unfair sentencing. We're seeing that, of course, in the past with George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and too many others. What can we do to have better relationships with law enforcement and the judicial system? Dr. Dunn, you've worked on and studied racial profiling at the start of the criminal justice system with police. According to the NAACP, a Black person is 5 times more likely to be stopped without just cause than a white person. So what do we do to better this relationship?
Well, for me, and Alex, you touched on my research there. I have focused on the front end of that criminal justice continuum, because the most frequent contact that the average citizen has with the criminal justice system comes through contact with the police, which comes in the form of a traffic stop. Thus, my focus primarily on the front end of that continuum. If we can diminish those unjust or unnecessary interactions on the front end, we can then preclude some of the more detrimental impacts that are experienced throughout the breadth of the criminal justice continuum. So to that point, I would say we can begin by enacting racial profiling legislation at the federal, the state, and the local level. The late Congressman John Conyers first introduced racial profiling legislation at the federal level in 1998. I've gone to Washington and lobbied on behalf of it, and to this day, we yet to have enacted racial profiling either at the federal level, at the state level, or at the local level. And there's a need for it at each. And along with prohibiting racial profiling, we also need the collection of racial and social demographic data that needs to be analyzed and reported out and made transparent to incorporate some accountability into the system and the process.
You talk about data and accountability. How also important is data in legitimizing the feelings from the Black community when it comes to this topic?
It's critically important. I did my dissertation on racial profiling. I started studying the issue in 1998, and it was specifically because it was always viewed as anecdotal data from disgruntled minorities. So that is why my dissertation chair told me he would only chair it if it was empirical, data-driven. And that's why having the data is so critically important. If we don't collect it, you can't tell the magnitude or the scope of the problem. In essence, it doesn't exist.
Thank you, Dr. Dunn. Ms. Walker, you too have consulted with police departments and worked on training in this area, sometimes along with Dr. Dunn. What have you found to be effective and what still needs to be done?
So I really get frustrated with this. I work at an academic medical center and everything is about research and data. And, you know, one of the conversations that I have, and I appreciate that there definitely is a place for that, but one of the conversations I have is, okay, we've done enough research and we have enough data. We know this is real. Now, what action are we going to take? You know, how are we going to hold people accountable? What are we going to do? Because asking for more research or more data in some ways is a form of resistance. It's part of that whole white fragility need to pretend that it's not real, to not believe people's experiences or people's stories. And the truth is, if you grew up in America, you know racial profiling is real at this stage. I think we need to have more people of color in those roles. We need more Black judges, more Black lawyers, more Black police officers. We need parents who are disciplined with their children and will keep them in school so that they can have options. And we need to make sure that when we hold those kinds of positions, that if we have to, we are holding people's hands and showing them what they need to do, helping them to understand what's possible so that they can fulfill those roles. Because until we actually become part of the system versus just being managed by or controlled by the system, we're going to continue to struggle. And I think another thing that we could do is the media tends to focus solely on these shootings where there are Black, white officers and Black men. But the truth is, white police officers kill a whole lot of white people, and the media never shows that. And so the white society at large doesn't really know how they're being abused. They don't understand that they are also victims of this same violence. And communities tend to focus on their own group interests. So I think if they knew what was happening to them, it wouldn't be this group over here who is suffering. It'd be good if we could sort of highlight what is actually happening across our system, not just to Black folks, but to all people. We obviously are disparately feeling the pain from that, don't want to take anything away from that. But at the same time, white people don't know what's happening to them because the media doesn't tell that story. And that's a story that I think needs to be told.
That's an excellent point. I do also want to piggyback upon your point of expanding the diversity in these job sectors and having somebody to be able to help pull you up, help you in that journey to success in that particular field. Do you see that is happening? Or is that something that is lacking right now?
I think we could be more intentional with that. You know, again, as a community, I think we need to be more strategic about that. So what are Black lawyers doing to ensure that we have a fresh crop of Black lawyers graduating every year? How are they putting their own time and energy and money into making sure that that happens? What is the Black Police Union doing? How are they making sure that they're reaching out to young people? Are they visiting high schools? Are they visiting middle schools? Are they talking to students about this as a profession and how important it is that we have representation? Judge, I'm sure you're probably doing some things. I know, Ronnie, you've done some things. But as a group, as a unit, as a community, I think we have to do more in those areas.
Thank you.
With intention.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off there.
That's okay.
Judge Dawson, how important is implicit bias training on the bench and in the courtroom? And how do we strengthen trust in that part of the judicial system?
Wow, great question. My colleagues, I mean, they really killed it. I'll answer that question, and then I just have to say what Ms. Walker stated was so important about us being in position so that we can change the narrative as police officers, prosecutors, and judges. Dr. Dunn, absolutely right. The data has to be there. We have to document what's going on so that we can actually make change. And he's so correct. I hear it all the time. Judge, if I go and report this officer that cursed me out, it's not going to mean anything. And I always tell them, your one report will add up. It'll be 1, and then it'll be 2. And then the next thing you know, it's 1,000. And you can no longer ignore how officer X, Y, and Z is performing on the street. So the data is so important. Implicit bias it's strong. especially from the bench. I mean, I practice as a defense attorney, and one of the things that made me passionate about running for judge was the way I was treated as an African-American lawyer by some other judges, as well as my clients. And I could see the difference. And I wanted to make sure that I brought a different perspective to the bench. I really want to change the narrative because it's terrible when you really think about it, what's happening in these courtrooms across our country. And, one other thing I want to mention is so interesting about the traffic stops. And it's the challenge that we have is that they're supposed to be non-biased, right? They're supposed to be 25 miles per hour. And if you go over the miles, you're going to get stopped. So it starts that way. But then we know that when you put into play different races and you can see the person that you're pulling over, it changes everything. So it goes from being an unbiased law to keep control and at least chaos under control in your community to something that goes bad. And then now I'm going to say this in case we don't get to it. I'm worried about this time that we're in, not only because of the way that African Americans are being treated, but I'm also worried because we know that it's unfair. And now the attitudes that we have on the streets are often becoming dangerous because these officers aren't backing down, we aren't backing down, and it's going to be a recipe for disaster. So these traffic stops that are supposed to be based on a non-biased law, it turns biased and then it turns bad because now you have two opposing forces at each other. So I'm a little worried about this time. I think we need what we're doing. We need these forums. We need action fast because if we don't change what's happening out here, there's going to be more and more chaos on the streets. Because when I see it in my court, it seems as if, I'm going to tell you, every brother and sister now, and rightfully so, they challenge the officers right in those cars, right on the street. And it's going to just lead to more bad results. We just got to figure out a way to get beyond this and to move so that we're getting justice on the streets, but we're not having to fight for it because we're going to lose more lives that way.
Thank you, Judge. And my follow-up to you, there is a history, as was touched upon in the last discussion, of legalized discrimination in this country. How far have we come to overturn those laws, and how far do we still have to go?
Well, I mean, technically, they would be overturned at this point, right? Because we have enough people in the branches of government who aren't going for that. But we know in its application, it still exists. And that's something that's the struggle, right? When we know that the laws, we now have the power, or at least the representation, to change the laws, but we can't change the mindsets. We can't change the bias. We can't change the fact that a judge has the option to give you no jail time or 5 years in jail. But if you don't look like me, I'm always going to lean toward the jail time because the law was written for a specific purpose, but that judge is going to be the one that's going to apply it in a biased manner. So that's the challenge. It's not now that it's so much overt, but it's covert. It's the bias, the implicit bias that's causing all these problems. But the solution, just like Ms. Walker said, is we have to be ready, we have to be prepared, and we have to get in position. Like, for instance, in I think at least in Cuyahoga County, if not beyond, or maybe the state of Ohio, I mean, there are very few African-American men judges. And we've gotten together as a group of men judges trying to figure out, how do we solve that problem? Look, how do we convince those Black lawyers who are making so much money defending our brothers and sisters to come on over and take a pay cut and work as a judge? Because that's where we need you. We need you in the prosecutor's office, where you can throw out these cases that are BS from the beginning so that you don't even have to go broke trying to hire a lawyer to defend yourself and then risk a judge or jury who doesn't understand where you come from. So we have to get our young people prepared and ready so they can step right into these positions because we need them.
Just out of curiosity, because I lived in Alabama for 2 years recently, and they still have in their constitution the original segregation laws that would apply if federally that was, not outlawed. How dangerous is it that those kinds of things are still on some state rolls?
Oh, it's absolutely dangerous because you put those laws with a prosecutor and judge who has the same mindset, and then you have no recourse. You can appeal it up to the higher courts, but if it's still a law on the books, that's a problem. So we do have to systematically attack those laws, and we have to, like Dr. Dunn would say, we have to be intelligent enough and diligent enough to research. Let's go across this country. Let's find out all of these laws that are still on the books that affect African Americans because we think it's no big deal until you find yourself in front of a prosecutor and judge who can use that law to do whatever they want to you. So it is important. It is important to get those laws off the books because otherwise, again, it's just going to lead to disaster.
Thank you, Judge. I want to move to COVID-19, but before I do, did anyone want to build upon anything we had said in the judicial system? All right, wonderful.
I do want to add one point or a couple of points. While it's important also that people of color be in positions within the criminal justice system and law enforcement in particular and other areas, it's imperative that we not just be satisfied in being in the room. We have to change those organizations and the way that they function. And that's where we're talking about the institutional racism and how do we disrupt and intervene to deconstruct these racialized systems in the way that they operate. And the culture within organizations and institutions are conservative and they are self-perpetuating. So it's a challenge and it is a struggle, but we have to be brave, bold, and courageous when we go into these institutions and are in these positions, because let's be candid, there are many police agencies across this country that have people that look like you and I in leadership roles, yet and still these problems persist. So just because we have Black leadership at the municipal, the state level, in government, and in these institutions, it's about change. It's about transforming those institutions and the way that they operate.
Judge Dawson, a quick follow-up from you.
And that's why Dr. Dunn is so important for men like you and Ms. Walker. It's important for you to stay on us, because you're right. We get there and we'll get lazy. We'll start getting that paycheck and getting those days off and playing golf. And you're right. And we're not even thinking about it, but you're absolutely right. We need individuals in the education system to continue to study our history so that when leaders are in those positions, you call us out. You show up in the courtroom. You remind me just by your presence that, okay, you know what? That brother's watching me. And it isn't just about me, because you're right. We will get lazy. So absolutely, we need you. And this is so important. Thank you for that. Absolutely.
And I'm not immune to it either in academia. So in all sectors, it's imperative that we do that.
That's
wonderful.
Right.
Thank you all three for your discussion on this topic. Of course, we are in the middle of a pandemic, and scientific evidence shows minority populations, especially Black and Latinx communities, are experiencing a higher incidence of COVID-19 contraction and death. What appears to be a racial connection is linked to inequity in employment, healthcare access, pre-existing conditions, and other disparities driven by poverty. Ms. Walker, can you talk about the impact of COVID on minority populations from both a health and economic standpoint?
Sure, absolutely. I can tell you that, and I'll just kind of piggyback on what Dr. Dunn was saying about structural racism. It shows up everywhere. So structural racism is showing up in housing, it's showing up in economics, the justice system, education, and it's also showing up in healthcare. And I think part of the issue too is that we don't always have the luxury of social distancing. We are the people who are doing all the service jobs. We're the people delivering the packages to the people who are hiding out in their homes. We are the people who are cleaning up the hospital and cleaning up all the waste and being exposed to this thing. And, we often live in homes where there might be several people. And so we're all being exposed to each other. And then we also don't trust the healthcare system. So instead of going into the hospital, out of fear or being afraid to get checked, we sometimes will wait too long and continue to infect each other and others. And also, when we do go into these healthcare systems, we're not going to get the same treatment. We are going to be put off. We're going to not get the same level of attention. And so this all has an impact. And just like it does in all the other sectors, it has an impact on health too. So, anything that is happening in society, we feel it the worst. And this is no different. This is absolutely no different. And so we are dying in large numbers. And then unfortunately, some of us are not taking this seriously. So we have that too. And it's not just us, there are plenty of white folks walking around without masks too. But I think it's a complex issue. There are many things happening at once, which are leading to us having a greater number of deaths. And then we tend to be less healthy anyway, because of the structural racism and what we carry every day, all that extra cognitive load and the psychological stress, all that cortisol that racism creates makes you literally sick. It actually creates cortisol in your body, that tension and that stress, and that turns into physical illness. And so we have all these underlying issues, and this is a disease that is worse for people with underlying issues. And then when there is a shortage of protective equipment, who do you think is going to get the equipment? If there's a shortage of, intubation tubes, who do you think is going to, get whatever is needed to sustain life? It generally, unfortunately, is not going to be us, even when we have really great insurance, because of the bias, and not just because of the bias, because of just blatant racism. People make choices and they tend to choose the people that are part of their groups in this culture. Now, it's not true for every single person, but we know that it happens quite a bit.
You mentioned, Ms. Walker, all other sectors. Obviously, the pandemic is top of mind right now, but for many, healthcare disparities have existed before this virus and will continue and span all socioeconomic classes. As you, of course, are aware, it was through the formation of the Congressional Black Caucus Health Brain Trust that first brought the issue of health disparities to the forefront of our nation's conscience. But only a start. Now, from increased maternal mortality to higher risk for prostate cancer, how do we continue to improve access to and quality of healthcare for minorities?
Again, we have to be intentional with all these things. One of the things that we are doing in my hospital is anytime any patient has any issue or anybody even sees something in the hospital, we have reporting systems. And I, along with another one of my colleagues who is a physician of color, we reviewed every last one of those. And then we follow up, and then we hold people accountable for their behavior. And it may mean we have to go in and with a whole unit and have some discussions around what happened and why it's problematic and what we need to do differently. There are actually, so we talk about structural racism in healthcare. There are actually things built into the healthcare system that there's like a point system with a lot of these illnesses where, so say for instance, you've got a problem and you need a kidney transplant. So there was something called an EGFR, which is a rating system where if you were Black, you would automatically get a number that was rated higher than someone else. And that rating would then prevent you from getting a kidney transplant. And this was something that was based on some kind of clinical research done over 100 years ago, based on basically nothing. So there's a lot of racism already built into that system. And it was something that we were still doing up until actually this year, we stopped using that rating. And that's just one. There are things that involve cardiology, where there are specific ratings that Black folks get. Based on what? We have already proven that this is just a social construct, not a biological one. People are mixed up with all kinds of genetics. So it's just based on an old racist paradigm, but it's still built into the system. And so uncovering those things, challenging them, getting them changed. You would not believe what we had to go through just to get that one marker changed. And there are hundreds of them.
Thank you, Ms. Walker. And I do want to briefly address our audience this evening. We see that you are asking some great questions, and we plan to ask our panelists those questions very soon. But we just wanted to make sure you knew that we saw the questions that you all are asking and look forward to addressing them. Dr. Dunn, I want to move to you on this COVID topic. Many cities across the country, LA, New York City, Cleveland, have begun to declare racism as a public health crisis. This effectively meaning cities now have to develop a plan to address racism and come up with ways to combat it. What steps can cities such as Cleveland, we even are seeing today that the mayor of Cleveland is introducing or drafting legislation to council to try and create a division within the public health department. So what do these types of cities, Ohio cities, American cities, take to move towards actionable solutions in accordance with this public health crisis declaration?
Well, now that we have these public declarations and they've been enacted by municipalities, now they have to enact policies and programs and allocate resources to help eradicate these factors, these barriers that have been created over generations, for centuries actually, through government public policies. And help to eradicate and remediate some of the damage done by those governmental policies. Redlining, for example, which has segregated Black and brown and minority communities across this country. And then that creates the conditions in which we see these negative health disparities, but they're coupled with other social economic factors in which you find Black and brown people are always disproportionately adversely affected. Concentrated poverty, poor educational system, limited access to health care, food deserts, things of this nature. So all of this is a result of government policy. Actually, when you look at the FHA and the VA loans, they in 1934, when the Federal Housing Administration was founded, and they started giving FHA loans, up through 68, only 2% of those government-backed loans went to African Americans and people of color. So that's why we have what I refer to as chocolate cities and vanilla suburbs. And we have the limited, disinvested, underserved resources in these inner city communities. So policies to help remediate some of those damages. And particularly in Cuyahoga County, I'm reminded of during the war on drugs, how we criminalized drug addiction. And particularly it impacted the African American and minority communities of color. Well, now we're in a different moment where we now are treating drug addiction as a public health crisis, which it has always been. Well, let's not just say, oh, well, we've learned from the past and now we're following a different approach. Let's go back and help remediate some of the damage that we caused over this 30 some odd year period, the negative impact we had in Black and brown communities, destroying Black lives, families, and communities. So some of those resources that are geared towards addressing the opioid epidemic need to go to remediating the damage done in the African American, Hispanic, and low-income communities as well.
Thank you, Dr. Dunn. And to build upon that, when we look at the grassroots or the on-the-ground efforts to fight racism, we're seeing a lot of college students and younger generations engaged in protest against racism. What do they need to know as they become the future voices of racial equity?
And is that for myself?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Okay, thank you. Well, one, it's imperative that you know your history. You have to know the history, know the origins of these structures that we're fighting against. This isn't something just in this moment, and learn from your elders as well. We stand, and my work, it stands on the shoulders of your grandfather's work, Alex. His Terry v. Ohio, that was a racial profiling argument that he raised before the Supreme Court in 1968. That is germane to my research and my body of work. And I was honored to have the chance to discuss that with him and share that with him. So educate ourselves. There's a lot of discussion now about these public figures, these public hip hop figures, and their discussions with the presidential campaigns and their statements on what's best for Black America. Well, come on now, how educated are they on these structural issues and the history. And yet we're turning to them to lead and tell us what is best and needed for Black America. That's a scary proposition for me. That is.
Thank you, Dr. Dunn. Judge Dawson, with COVID-19 wreaking havoc on the minority communities, how do you balance the need for justice by seeing a case to its conclusion and postponing a case for COVID safety reasons?
Wow, very, very good question, and it's very difficult. I will say this too. I want to say I'm very proud of our people, and I mean that generally. In my courtroom, we require masks, we require social distancing, and I have not had a single problem with it, because I know people have been objecting to that across our country. But in my courtroom, there is no problem. Everyone's playing the game the way we should. Even though I'd like to see it a little bit more out in the community. You know, I live in East Cleveland and I travel in East Cleveland, you know, so if I go to one of the local, you know, barbecue joints or something like that, I'll see a lot of people with no masks on, not social distancing. And just like Ms. Walker said, many of us aren't taking it seriously. But in the courtroom and when it comes to justice, we have an obligation to take it seriously for everyone, even if they don't. So I practice social distancing. I limit my docket so we don't have a lot of people in at the same time. And honestly, unless it's a very violent crime, I've been either no jail time or postponing it, because there's some laws, as we just talked about, on the books that require jail time, like OVIs, drinking and driving, things like that. But if I can avoid the jail time or put it off right now because of COVID, that's what I'm doing. But you know, the interesting thing, you know, because no one thinks about the fact that a court, we're still essential workers, and that's because crime does not stop. And sometimes I'm sitting there thinking, we have people dying of COVID-19 and you two are fighting in the middle of the street over some tennis shoes. You know what I mean? So it bothers me sometimes, but I still have to think in the regard of safety, you know, health, and making sure everybody's okay. So we do that through the court. We will move cases, and even if we need to, we will postpone them for as long as we have to.
You mentioned the next step of the judicial system if somebody, you know, does get sent to jail. I want to talk about prisons. According to the NAACP, African Americans are incarcerated more than 5 times the rate of whites. Prisons, due to their conditions and overcrowding, have become hotbeds for COVID-19, as we've seen. How is the pandemic reflecting disparities in the judicial system and incarceration? And do you think that will help lead to reform?
Well, luckily, we do have a lot of people speaking out in regard to how prisoners are treated, especially during this time. So we have voices who are making good noise, good trouble in regard to we have to care about our prisoners because their conditions are terrible when you really think about how close they are. And then on top of it, you're right. It goes right back. Everything is so connected. It goes right back to what we talked about. If you don't have a judge and a prosecutor who cares about the person in front of us, I'm going to send you to jail and I'm not even going to think about COVID-19. Meanwhile, before I do any sentencing, that's one of the first things I think about. Even when I'm setting bonds, you know, I try to set it in a way that, you know, you'll have an opportunity to post your bond as opposed to having to go to the county jail and deal with those bad conditions there. So I think it's important that we have to not only acknowledge that there's a disparity, but the more we bring it up, then I think that will create reform in the sense that we're going to at least care about the health and welfare of the people we are putting in jail. And you're absolutely right. If the bias exists, it will still exist even when you're sending someone to jail in the middle of a pandemic. It won't change. You'll go to jail because the color of your skin or because I don't understand you. So yeah, we have a lot of work to do in that regard. But I do believe that this new call for compassion for inmates right now is going to have lasting change.
All right. Before we move on to our question and answer session, did anyone want to make any other comments on COVID-19? All right, great. Thank you all so much for such an exciting but very important discussion and going in depth on a lot of these topics. I want to address some of these comments that we've been asked by members of our audience. Jermel Carr saying I get mine, you get yours attitude is so real. How do we get past this mindset today? I believe, Ms. Walker, you had brought that up first.
Yeah, I just think we have to work together as a community to reframe things and to change that mindset. You know, there's just such a coldness associated with that, just a lack of appreciation for humanity. And I think we have to make sure that we're staying connected to our young people too, so that they don't get caught up in this kind of, not really valuing life, not valuing humanity, not wanting to appreciate, what really life has to offer. And I think as adults, we have to make sure we stay connected to young people, that we need to stay in their lives. That attitude is just so wrong for Black folks. That we're only a small percentage of the population. And, populations thrive when they are in community with one another. And I think we have to find ways to do that more effectively.
Thank you. We have a question from Renee Whiteside. She asks, how do you overcome precedents in the law to affect change? Judge?
Well, you just take the bold risk of being a renegade. And if you care about your people enough, that's what you'll do. There are many times where I make decisions and I say, hey, if I'm wrong, someone will take it to the Court of Appeals and they'll have to, tell me I'm wrong. But I will make a decision that's in the best interest of the person right in front of me. And I am bent on second chances because I just think we need them. I think the mindset of our young people today is so far gone sometimes that I want to give them a chance to bring it back in. I want to give them a chance to have a mentor like Ms. Walker or Dr. Dunn, so you can see that there's a different way of thinking. And it even goes to the you have yours, I'm going to get mine mentality. I think for those professionals who make it and those of us who care, we have to get back close to the issue and the problem. So there's a lot of property in East Cleveland if someone wants to come back and move to the city, because we need professionals. We need you guys so that they can say, oh, that's the OG. He gets up and he goes to work every day. He puts on a suit every day. Look at Miss Walker. She's not in the video shape. We know what's going on. They need to see that so that we can change the behavior.
Dr. Dunn, do you want to build upon either of those questions from the audience in the I get mine, you get yours mentality, or the overcoming precedents?
Yes, absolutely. Ironically, I argue racial profiling is the great equalizer for that mindset. That's the one of the few things all Black people still have in common: the potential to be subjected to racial profiling. I don't care what your social status is. I don't care what your credentials are, what your title is, none of that. What your religion is. It's the great equalizer within this larger societal context. So I think, unfortunately, and I know of people that had to have a negative encounter being profiled to being disabused of such notions. So that's a luxury that, as Ms. Walker stated, we can't afford as a people, because while we think we might have arrived, the larger society isn't going to view you that way or treat you that way.
That's right.
Thank you, Dr. Dunn. I wanted to add, of course, if anybody has any more questions they want to share, feel free to do so. You can place questions in the comments. Renee Whiteside also asking, oh, I'm sorry, we had just answered that question. While we're thinking on that, while people have a chance to ask more questions, I also want to pose this to you all, because you all clearly are champions on these topics. But is there frustration or fatigue in trying to address these issues constantly? Ms. Walker, you've just...
Oh my God, yes. Yeah, but I feel like I am driven. I am driven, and this requires stamina. I'm in it for the long game because it has to be. This might not be solved in my lifetime, but I will tell you, I'm going to do everything in my power to try to change it. And I understand also that change actually happens one encounter at a time, one moment at a time, one person at a time. And, just kind of embracing that if I can, impact 100 people in my lifetime, then those 100 people can impact 100 people. We can start a snowball effect. But yes, we have to keep working. I mean, it's relentless work. We've been working for 400 years or longer on this, and we have to keep doing it. We can never stop, never.
Dr. Dunn?
Yes, I would echo that sentiment. This work is a life's calling for me. It's I don't have an option. I don't have a choice. I've been at this, as I stated, I've been working specifically on racial profiling since the mid-90s. And many will tell you, and I've had people come to me at different points in time when the DOJ came to town. I had people calling me, congratulating me, telling me this vindicates or validates your argument and your work all these years. For so long, I felt like John the Baptist singing in the wilderness about racial profiling. So in this current moment, I'm like, well, gee, welcome to the party. I'm glad everyone finally woke up to this reality of what's been going on in our country relative to the police and the African American community. So, but to your question, I don't have an option. This work chose me. I didn't necessarily choose it.
And Judge Dawson, anything to add?
Well, I ran for my position. It's kind of funny, elected official, so I kind of chose the job. But I will say this: it's amazing because sometimes for me, it's draining. I must admit, because what I'm seeing in my courtroom, I'm seeing the problems that are being imposed on our race, and then I'm seeing, I get to see people at their worst. So I see those who I just want to reach out. Sometimes I want to reach out and shake them. Sometimes I want to reach out and hug them because they just don't understand. They don't see 10 steps down the road. They don't see how this particular attitude that you're displaying, even to me as a judge, will get you killed in the street in front of the wrong officer. Or in front of a different judge, you'd be spending 10 years in prison just because of the way you're acting. So for me, sometimes it's draining. But I am dedicated to the work also. I am dedicated to helping people break cycles. And probably that's why I'm so into my yoga, because I need a way to decompress also after these long days in court. But I love it. I love what I do. And I believe I'm on a mission. It's kind of my ministry to help these people, our people, everyone see how to navigate this legal system without losing your life or your liberty. And that's my job.
We have another question from one of our viewers right now. They'd like to hear about racial equity and social justice in the corporate environment from that perspective. What does it look like to manage it there? Ms. Walker, would you take the first on that?
Sure, absolutely. It means also speaking up. It means having courage. It means pointing out disparities. It means that you might have to be in spaces and bring things to people's attention that make them uncomfortable. And what I find is in the work that I do, there's a delicate balance. It's very nuanced between holding people and pushing them at the same time, pushing them to see what's really going on, pushing them to see things they don't want to see, making implicit more explicit around what's happening in these institutions just automatically, and kind of slowing down those processes so people can actually see how people are being negatively affected by some of the behavior going on. So even in a corporate environment, you've got to have courage, but you also have to have relationships. You want to be a social justice warrior, but at the same time, you have to have relationships so people are willing to fight the fight with you. So you have to be invitational in this work. It's not an easy thing, but it's a necessary thing. And when we're in these environments, we have to do the work there too. We have to do it everywhere.
Thank you, Ms. Walker. Dr. Dunn, did you want to add anything to that?
Sure. For me, it's about one, raising awareness, making people aware of their biases, and we all have them, and not only relative to race. And also doing an examination within those corporations, within those organizations, looking at the demographic profile of that organization. Is it an exclusive boys club or is it inclusive? And there's a continuum, and there are tools to help assess an organization from that perspective. Me in an academic setting at Cleveland State, we began with the data. I had to, my last diversity action plan incorporated baseline demographic data across that institution, which was the first time in the institution's history that had been included in a diversity plan, and then establishing benchmarks and then presenting that data. While people might recognize or understand intuitively, when you put the data before them and show them how we like diversity and where those gaps are, then that's different. And that's how you can begin those tough and difficult conversations and help sway people. It's about dialogue and engaging with people, meeting them where they are. And mind you, this is tough work. There's a lot of resistance you're going to encounter, but you just have to be persistent.
And of course, Judge Dawson, before you were on the bench, you have a corporate background. Can you talk a little bit to that corporate environment?
You know, I'll state, just to add a different spice to it, you know, I would beg that all of us African Americans, especially the young people that are in these corporate environments and make their way into the corporate world, that we take enough pride and care for our race and those who are coming up behind us, that we give our best example. So for instance, for me, I just always wanted to show people that, yes, African Americans, a young Black man from East Cleveland, I can speak intelligently. I can, add 2 and 2. I can be trusted. And I think there's a value in that. So that when we make it in these corporate spaces, I hate to say it, but we're representing our race. And I don't think a lot of us take that seriously enough, because you'll go into some places, whether it's, the high level corporate jobs or entry level. And if you have someone on their cell phone, or they're not paying attention, or they don't give good service or interaction, when we're in these positions, we represent everyone else, because that's going to determine whether or not the door is going to be open or closed. But then we'll have Dr. Dunn break the doors down and Ms. Walker break the doors down, but until then, we need you to represent for us when you're in that position, to show that, yes, we are professionals and we can do this job too.
Judge Dawson, another question to you from our commenters. They ask regarding voting, and this is from Tanya Horn, how do we reach the people who really need to understand how voting is so important during the midterm and local elections? Judge Dawson, we need more judges like you on the bench, and the people that are in the courts for offenses need to understand this.
It is so important, and it's a challenge, because the judges, that race is not a sexy race. You know what I mean? It's not glamorous or anything like that, and a lot of people dial it out. In fact, if you look at the statistics, there are people who will vote all the way down the ballot, but when you get to the judges, they stop voting. So and it's amazing, because you would think enough of us.
We've lost Judge Dawson for just a moment. Hopefully we will get him back and be able to have him continue his thought on that. We do have another question from our commenters that is perfectly posed to both of you, especially working with police departments. Jermel Carr asking, when we talk about racial profiling and racially charged police brutality, do you think there will be any real changes as long as we go after individual officers, or is there an opportunity to pursue legislation to hold entire departments accountable? And how does this start? Dr. Dunn, we'll start with you, and Ms. Walker will follow up with you.
Well, yes, that's an excellent question. That is really what the Department of Justice pattern and practice investigations are geared and designed to do, help to hold police departments accountable and help reform them. As we know, Cleveland is under a consent decree at present. The thing is, and under the Obama administration, I think there were at least 20 investigations of municipal police departments that came under federal consent decrees. We know the Trump administration has moved away from initiating pattern and practice investigations or enforcing them. So at that point, for me and my work and my focus in that arena, it shifted to the state level and the local level. So those are areas where we can still have an impact. policing is a local function. So by being involved in the political process, as well as being civically engaged, every person needs to not only vote, but they need to participate in a civil rights or civil advocacy organization, the NAACP, the Urban League, the ACLU, to help advocate for these reforms that are needed. There is legislation being introduced, the George Floyd Act, at the federal level, establishing these national database on corrupt police officers that have been fired for just cause, being decertified, to keep them from being able to go from department to department. That is one component of that, the ban on the chokeholds, and there's some more provisions in that. And something similar has been introduced or recommended by the governor at the state level as well. So there are still opportunities and efforts. In this current administration, that work has kind of devolved more at the state and local level.
Thank you, Dr. Dunn. Ms. Walker?
You know, the way in which to me, the whole structure and the way we do policing is all wrong. You know, we have these people who have almost no education, maybe no exposure, coming into communities they know nothing about. They tend to be young. We give them a gun, a badge, a car that goes 100 miles an hour, and the full power and authority of the state, and very little education or training. The training is mostly based on how to do takedowns, how to drive, how to shoot. And then we expect them to be social workers. We expect them to be psychologists. We expect them to be counselors. We expect, you know, the whole way that it's structured is unrealistic. And so there's been a lot of discussion about defunding police. And I think what people misunderstand about that is they're not saying we don't need some police officers. One, we need police because when we don't know who to call, that's who we call. Frankly, we call them for everything. But we need police officers that we are carefully selected for this type of role. We need people with the right disposition, the right value system. We need to really be taking time with who we allow to have that kind of power and authority. And then we also need the police to have partnerships with other social services to support that type of work, so the police aren't being burdened with that too. So I just think this is a complex problem. And I think the way the whole thing was designed, and we know that it comes from slave patrols, but today in a modern society, you know, we need to totally rethink how this is. And I'm all for just really completely dismantling the system as is. Not saying that we don't need police officers, but the way that the whole thing is structured today is not serving us well. It's not serving Black folks well, and honestly, it's not serving white people well either.
Thank you so much, Judge Dawson. I believe we have you back with us. So if you would not mind finishing your point you were making earlier in regards to voting and judges.
Okay, in regard to voting, I think it's important for us to get involved with the local elections because judges can shape your life. Judges can change your life. And even the prosecutors, when you can vote for them. And what I find interesting and what I was saying before I left was that we all know someone who's had some type of interaction with the legal system. And oftentimes it's negative, but yet we don't take the energy that we feel when we feel that negative energy from that bad judgment or that bad prosecution and carry it into elections. We cannot forget. Unfortunately, we just have a short memory when it comes to that because we don't go against those judges. There are judges in Cuyahoga County who have been on the bench for years, and at the same time, they have reputations of how they treat African Americans. So it's just mind-boggling that we don't get involved, and it's so important that we take the local elections seriously. Absolutely.
Thank you all. If there are any other comments, please feel free to put them in. But I do want to go ahead and ask you all a couple more questions as we come to the conclusion of this event. Number one, you know, achieving these concepts can't be done alone. How do we encourage responsible allies without a savior complex and who are willing to learn and not just be taught? Dr. Dunn.
Wow, that's a very good question. Well, first of all, there is no savior coming to save us. I don't know if you can see the picture over my right shoulder, but that is a picture of two iconic figures, Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, both of which we know we viewed them in some sense as saviors. But it is going to take a collective we to bring about the change that we are striving for. We, once again, have been in this country 401 years, and there have been great leaders that have come about, but they weren't singular individuals that brought about that change. They had organizations and common everyday folk that we will never know name behind them. So once again, the point I made just a moment ago about joining a local organization and that is doing this work, forming a local organization even, if you will, or getting with a nonprofit of some sort, but aligning ourselves and working collectively is the only way that I think we're truly going to affect substantive and sustained change in this society.
Ms. Walker, the same question to you.
Yeah, we definitely cannot do this work on our own. We're only, 13, 14% of the population. So we do have to have allies in the work. And I don't think you can teach this out of people, but I do think that people are transformed by experience. So when I work with people, we try to use a lot of storytelling. We try to create opportunities for people to spend time together so that they can be in deep conversation. We try to facilitate deep conversation. Matter of fact, we're in the process of facilitating several deep conversations with groups about racism. And it's an impactful thing. People are sharing their personal stories. People are really being moved. Many people move to tears in workspaces. And I can actually start to see a shift in the environment. So I do think we have to be invitational with other people. I think we have to show and share what our experiences are like. And that can be difficult. I know a lot of young people feel like, well, it's not my job to educate you or tell you, go do your own education. And for me, it actually is my job to do that. And I think in as much as we can share our experience, then people will know. And I think most people want to do what's right. They want to see themselves as good people and aren't often consciously aware of how their privilege can be disenfranchising for other groups. So I think just finding creative ways to show people how their behavior is detrimental to other groups, but in ways where you're not necessarily shaming people, but inviting them to shift, to see things and then to shift behavior.
Thank you so much, Ms. Walker. And Judge Dawson, the same question to you. How do we encourage this responsibility in our allies? Oh, you're muted, I think, Judge Dawson. Let's bring you on back.
Just like, there you go. Am I the technology problem tonight? It's just like Ms. Walker said. It's about, showing almost by example. So, I had a really interesting experience over the weekend. I teach yoga. I've been teaching for a while. And interestingly, I teach at a predominantly, well, let me just call it an all-white studio, even though I'm opening my own studio for our people and to be inclusive. But I teach at an all-white studio, and I teach in Little Italy. So those of us who know Cleveland history, that's a kind of an interesting dynamic. And some of my classes are really, really early in the morning when it's, it's still dark outside. And, so sometimes it's a little weird, a weird feeling. But my point is, when I look into the class and I see the diversity, I see, all races in my class, and I'm able to, during that time, have storytelling time in the class, believe it or not. I'm able to, show my love, my compassion, and at the same time, my Blackness. It's almost like we're showing by example that, look, we can work together. we can be together. In fact, we're all human and we all want the same thing. We want love, we want compassion, we want to be successful. And I think it's just interactions like that that can start, and continue with the change that we need and the partners and the allies that we need.
Two more questions going around the room. Ms. Walker, you had brought up mental health earlier. There's a lot going on for all of us right now in the world with COVID, of course. And then on top of it, dealing with racial inequity for Black people is another strain on top of them, another weight. How do we protect our community of all ages while we exist in these current situations? And I'll let you go ahead and take point on that since you had brought it up.
Oh, I don't have the answer. I don't have the answers to any of this. I'm just sharing my opinion, but I don't know that that's an easy thing to do. I think we have to, in some ways, being sequestered in this way, I think has allowed families to spend more time together. And in order to have quality time, you need to have quantity of time. And so I think there are ways that we can use this disaster and this real dystopic kind of experience to spend more time with our families and to be more thoughtful about how we do that and intentional and actually talking to, each other in supportive ways. And, we have so much time together inside now. This is a great opportunity to learn more about our Black history and all the wonderful things that we've done, because that, I think, creates a real sense of purpose in young Black people. I think it creates a real sense of self-confidence. Knowing your history is really important. So there's time we could spend there and just kind of loving each other and laughing together. That's one thing we know how to do. So I think there are a lot of creative ways that we could actually use this time instead of just kind of being bored and feeling weird and kind of disconnected. I think we can maybe find more ways to connect. And the truth is, because we're all on Zoom, I think in many ways I've had an opportunity to talk to people who I haven't talked to in a long time. So
absolutely, that is a very good point. It's nice to reconnect. And Judge Dawson, you've mentioned the yoga. You work with young people. How do we protect that mental health and foster it while fighting these fights?
Ms. Walker, she stated it perfectly. Making sure that we're connecting and making sure that the history part is so important, because what else do we have to do if we're not either being bored, we're watching TV, we're watching news, no disrespect to you and your wonderful work, Alex, but we're watching the news, and that can be depressing, especially for young people, especially for people who don't have the ability to digest what's going on and separate, and everything is just coming on them. So less news, more history, body movement. We have to move, whether it's singing and dancing or yoga or, just, jumping jacks, but we have to stay active, read, and just stay positive and stay connected. And with saying all of that, we have to be aware that there are some people who don't have the resource of another person around. And those are the people I think I see in court because, with the pandemic, domestic violence rates are up, things like that. So I see a lot of violence in the courtroom right now. And a lot of times I say, wow, this is probably pandemic related. I mean, we're depressed, everything, we're on edge all the time. So it's hard. This is a great question because it's hard. If you have a family or you have people around you who love you, it's a little easier. But if you don't, it's something to be concerned about. And it will add to mental health issues for sure.
Dr. Dunn, anything to add to that?
I would just add that this pandemic has also given us an opportunity to really put things into perspective. What's really important in life. There are so many things we were forced to transition our lives so abruptly, so quickly, and things that we just couldn't imagine that we could really do without. Now we see, actually, we are. I mean, I know the economy is probably struggling because people aren't spending as much. They aren't shopping. We're doing out without some of the entertainment things and all of that. But also it gives you a chance to also, as Ms. Walker said, that quality time with family, but also with yourself. looking at it in a positive sense, introspective, getting in touch with yourself, and reading. I have read so many books in this context that I have so many that I had sitting aside and hadn't had an opportunity to, and now I do. So just trying to make the best of this time. It's a challenging time for everyone, but then also being very cognizant of our own mental health and wellness, and seeking assistance or counseling or talking to someone if it's needed. I know a family member and a close friend that have experienced suicide and within the past month within their family. So by all means, we can't take mental health lightly.
Thank you, Dr. Dunn, for sharing that with us. And we just have a couple minutes left before the conclusion of our event. So I have one last question to ask each of you. And I am going to begin with you, Dr. Dunn. As we look back at the history and forward towards the future, are we at any kind of turning point or milestone in the fight for social justice and racial equity?
I would submit that we are. This is an inflection point. It's a critical point in the life and the history of this country. And really, I say that in the sense of not only relative to the African American experience in this country, but our country as a democracy as we know it. Tuesday is a critical election, and we all know that. I'm a veteran, and the things that I have seen over the past 3.5 years, I never thought I would see in our country, in America. I don't want to delve too deeply into the politics of it all, but I would say yes. But COVID-19 and the George Floyd, the twin pandemics, if you will, of COVID-19 and racial violence, which has led to the greatest mass social justice, civil rights movement in the history of the world, it provides us an opportunity to hit the reset button. And we see where all of the inequities and injustices and disparities in our country and society are now. COVID-19 shone a bright, glaring light on that, as did the George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery killings. So now we have the opportunity to restructure our society in a more just and equitable and egalitarian way. So I'm cautiously optimistic that we will seize the moment and be up for it and sustain it. We can't do as we have in the past with, these short 10, 15, 20-year periods of trying to remedy and reconcile our country's troubled history. It has to be sustained.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dunn, and thank you for your service. Judge Dawson?
That was so wonderfully said. I'll just add that this is a great time for us. It is a critical moment. And I'll take it on a different direction. We have so many African Americans who have at least popularity. There's power with that, but at least popularity. And when certain things happen, they speak out. But what we have to do, being the ones on the battlefield, we have to make sure they stay engaged. So, not to knock them at all, because I love him, as opposed to LeBron, just doing a tweet or something every now and then, even though he's doing great work. The people like him, we got to keep them engaged so that they can speak to those who are disengaged. So, or when we get a Cardi B who wants to speak out on something, we got to keep her engaged, because there are tons of young people listening to her. So I think what we should do is expand our voice by any means necessary in a positive way, and get those people on the fringes to realize, hey, it's bigger than this one event. This is a fight we've been fighting, and we need to continue to fight. So if we can all get together, this is a great time for change.
Ms. Walker, you get the last word.
Yeah, I feel it. I feel it in my bones. I do think that we are at the crux of a major change. And I think, when societies or groups get to the tipping point of change, the people who are fighting against it fight the hardest because they really feel that the change is inevitable. And I don't know if people realize, but, we are a changed society, at least here in America. Our demographics have shifted enormously. For people who are 20 years old and younger, there's already more people of color in the country. And in the last 5 years, more babies of color have been born. So there are people who are fighting this inevitable change, but this train has already left the station. And the way in which I think the stillness of COVID allowed people to actually see what happened to George Floyd. And I think the busyness of life, a lot of people just were not able to see that. But because they were home, because they were still, I think they were actually able to have an experience. They felt that. And that made a difference in a lot of people. There are people who weren't thinking about race or racism or anything a year ago. And I have seen people who are completely transformed and have been by that. So I do think we're at the crux of change. And I'm excited to see what happens. I don't think we're going back. Just like with any change, you go up, you go back, you go up, you go back. It's not a straight line. You don't just flip a switch and it happens, but it's happening. And I see it. And these young people, a lot of them get it, and they get it in ways that adults don't. And I'm not saying that all young people get it, but I think there's enough of them that we're really going to see a shift. And the technology has just made the world so much smaller. People were protesting literally all over the globe. And so that ability to connect with large swaths of the population I think is going to have an impact too.
Well, this has been a powerful, important, and very thoughtful discussion on social justice and racial equity, looking at its origins and tackling it for a more just future for all. Thank you again to our panelists for their perspectives and expertise. Thank you, Avery Dennison, for sponsoring this discussion. I'd also like to extend a big thank you to BPACF for fostering and hosting tonight's event. Conversations, listening, and understanding is what makes our world a better place for all to exist in. I'd like to remind everyone once again, BPACF is having their 40th anniversary scholarship and awards gala that will be virtual this year. You can still register and find more information at bpacf.org and make a contribution at bpacf.org/donate. Again, that will be Saturday, November 14th. It has been my honor to be part of this discussion. Thank you to everyone who joined us this evening. Be safe, be well, and have a good night.
Take care.
Take care.